This is our third session in the series Introduction to Hasidism. The first section focused on the Baal Shem Tov. Then the second section focused on Hasidic tales, Hasidic stories, Hasidic narrative. And now, the third section, we're going to have an encounter, a relatively brief encounter with Hasidic niggunim, and then we're going to transition to what is really relevant to niggun as well, the role of women in Hasidut. But right now, Hasidic niggunim. That was a niggun, a melody from the Rishon tradition, and I don't know if you noticed it, but I was feeling and experiencing the actual sound vibrations in my vocal cords and in my vocal cavity and in the expression of the niggun. This is a central feature of what is called avodat hanigun. There is a sacred service of melody in Hasidism. That is to say that niggun melody is not just an embellishment to some other activity. It's not just to make people feel good or to get people interested or get people involved. Those are all very, very valid reasons for having niggunim, but niggun is as central in Hasidism as learning Torah or prayer. Niggun is absolutely central. One of the great Rabbeim, the Piasetzner Rebbe, says, the world is waiting for our people, the Jewish people, to teach the world how to sing. And our vodah is Torah, Tefillah, and Niggun. Those are the three main foci of sacred service as the Piasetzner Rebbe describes it in one place. Torah study, prayer, and singing niggunim. The Svat Emet, Rav Yehuda Aryeh Leib of Ger, points to the relationship between niggun and recognition, awareness of the divine vitality in all things. Our task is to listen intently, to discover, to recover. And there is sound production as well. The Sfas Emes focuses on the word hotzei ticha. Ani Hashem alkecha asher hotzei ticha. I took you out. It's not the creation, but the taking out of Egypt. And he expands this into the idea of bringing from the core, bringing into emergence, release from bondage. This means expression, the production and emission of sound, especially in sacred song, stringing a sonic holy thread, setting notes into line, and ourselves into alignment. Not only singing a niggun is sacred practice, but learning a niggun is sacred practice. When learning a niggun, we must be attentive to the niggun's flow, contours, dynamic unfolding. Most niggunim are quite singable and do not require that much technical expertise. That is to say, any layperson, anyone can join in singing a niggun. But the simplicity can be misleading. There is almost always a bit of a surprise, an unexpected move in the flow of the niggun, a cadence, a tempo shift, a tonal transition that is unexpected. It is precisely the quality of attentiveness that niggun wishes to cultivate, to remain alive and present. So we should not be misled by deceptive simplicity. As we learn the niggun is shaping our soul. Our spirits learn new modes of suppleness, new inner pathways, new delightful postures to inhabit and embody. Oh Because niggun is not just, you might say, frosting on the cake, that is to say, is not just an embellishment, but is a core practice, a sacred practice in the world of Hasidut, there is a fair amount of theoretical writing in Hasidic literature about the topic of melody and niggun, and what niggun does to our soul and how we are supposed to work with niggun. That is to say, just as Hasidic masters write tremendous amount about study of Torah and how to study Torah, why to study Torah, and avodah, in particular prayer, what tefillah is, how to pray, how to daven, there is a literature about how to sing a niggun. And I'm not talking about singing the notes correctly. That's another area. But the theoretical, I would say, the theology of niggun. So here's a teaching from the Shner Zalman of Ladi in Torah Or. I'm going to start over here where it says, about line 5 or 6. Whenever something rises from one state of being to another, for example, when a soul ascends from the lower to the higher Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, or paradise, this comes about through song, through shir, for song allows existence to be nullified. That's really quite an astonishing statement. I have to read the Hebrew. For those who are familiar with the Hebrew, it's so powerful and so beautiful. Shekol b'china ha'ala'a mimahut lamahut, kamo migan eden ha'tachton lagan eden ha'elyon v'chadomeh, hu al yedei hashir shehu b'chinat bitul hayesh, v'chanoda shelo yuchal litavot meyesh liyesh ela imkein nase hayesh techila b'chinat ayin. ואז יוכל להתהוות ממנו יש אחר בתוספת ברכה. בתוספת ברכה. Let me go back to the English. Then something new can come into existence with greater bounty than before. This may be compared to a seed that is planted in the ground. It then has to decompose in order to bring forth a plant that will carry many seeds. It is the same at higher levels regarding human souls or angels. In order to rise to a greater attainment, you must first go through bitul hayesh, nullification of what is, and of your current attainment. Only then can you ascend to something greater and higher. The image of the pillar that connects the lower and higher Gan Eden symbolizes this nullification. That is to say, the lower Gan Eden is my soul after it leaves the body. The higher Gan Eden, well, the truth is I don't know, but according to my very limited understanding, this is the transpersonal element of the soul. Perhaps the Bichinat Chaya V'Yechida, a transpersonal element. And so Niggun takes us beyond ourselves to a higher level. This is one of the teachings of the Rav Shner Zalman of Ladi, the founder of Chabad. This sacrifices in the temple were accompanied by song. The essence of korban, of sacrifice, is raising the flame, the reach nichoach, the savory aroma, from below to a higher level. This ascent calls for song, for nullification, as explained previously. I'd like to do more with this, but time is limited, so I'm going to go on to the next selection. This is a rather different piece. This is Ketem Paz from Tzvi Hirsch ben Yitzchak of Smotrish in Ukraine, who made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He settled in Tiberia. He became a disciple of the Kalisker, Rav Avram of Kalisk, who was himself a disciple of Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Vitebsk, who made Aliyah in the year 1777 in Tiberia. And he talks about the Baruch She'amar, which has 87 words. He calls it Ketem Paz. And he says, we sing everything. Apparently, the Baruch She'amar was chanted. I read one source that said they would chant Baruch She'amar for a full hour. So he talks about the chanting as you see here, Nishikin derechimu v'chedva, kisses of love and joy. So I'm going to select here where he says, when the Hasidim come together and the voices mingle, and it's a chorus, so to speak, a choir of voices coming together, when the voice of one singer joins with the voice of the other, the word of one with the word of the other, the thoughts of one with the thoughts of the other, in this manner everything becomes one. By our act they become a holy bound rope, a chevel. As it says, God is his people's portion, Jacob is the rope, the chevel of his inheritance. Ki chelek Hashem amo, Yaakov chevel nachalato. Just as in a rope the threads are twisted, intertwined, and bound one with the other until they become one cord, so too we must be twisted together, bound and intertwined, one with the other until we merit the promise of the prophet Hosea that God will draw us out of exile with the ropes of love. B'chavlei Adam emshechem ba'avotot ahava. B'chavlei avotot ahava. So in this text, we always talk nowadays about Achdut Yisrael. Everybody wants Achdut. Not easy to achieve, but everybody wants it. And in this image, a model of Achdut is voices coming together in harmony in Tefillah, singing the Tefillah together and making one shazur, making one chevel, making one bond that goes up to hevel, that goes up to heaven, to the Shemayim, and with the hevel, with the breath mingling together. This is the model of Achdut. The next text. I'm moving quickly because I want to give you at least a taste of some of the writings in Hasidic masters on this practice of niggun. Of Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, in his famous work Kedushat Levi, has a small section where he talks about, believe it or not, he talks about the octave. Yes, he mentions the octave, and he says, no, we go from one octave to the next octave. The notes are the same notes, but at a higher pitch. And he says, this is a symbol of, let me move it here. That is why the range of musical notes is called octave. And there's always level after level. Yesh madrega after madrega. That is to say, you never stop. Just as with music, you can always go higher and higher if you have the vocal range to do so, or if you're on an instrument like a piano that has many, many octaves, that you could go with a glissando, you can go forward and up and up and up and up and up. So this is the derech avodah. You never stop. You always go higher and higher. That's Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. The last selection is the Or HaMeir, Reb Zev Wolf of Zhitomir, who passed away in 1798. This is a wonderful Hasidic sefer, not as well known as it should be, and I'm happy just to highlight it here. Very, very briefly, he reads a phrase of the Tefillah, Habocher b'shirei zimra, Habocher b'shirei zimra, that when you finish the Psukei de Zimra, the psalms that we sing in the morning, especially the 145 to 150, Tehillah David, ending in Kol Hanashamat Hallelujah, Hallelujah, he says, what's most important is the Shiarei Zimra, is the silence afterwards. because the silence encapsulates all the resonances. And if you don't leave room, if you don't leave time for the silence afterwards, then you haven't gotten the full benefit of your zemer. So I must say that in our practice at home, we try, when we sing a beautiful zemer, maybe one of the zemirot of Shabbat, leave seconds, 10 seconds, it's a long time. 30 seconds is a very long time. Leave a moment for the resonance to sink in, to your ears to listen to the silence, to your heart to listen to the silence. The silence can be higher and deeper and more repercussive and more meaningful and more transformative than the words and the notes that you have just sung. I invite you to join in wherever you're listening to this, if you would like. Let me start again, one more time, to this beautiful melody from the school and the family of the great Rizhiner Rabbi, the great-grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich. I heard the silence. I hope you heard the silence as well. Now we're going to transition to part 2 of this talk. We had promised a discussion of women in Hasidut, and we're going to do that. This has been a controversial area. There were scholars who made the claim that the role of women in Hasidut was essentially equal to the role of men. And they were looking at very exceptional individuals, like the famous Chana Rachel, the so-called Moed of Ludmir. The truth is, she was a very unusual, really extraordinary, probably a unique personality. And she did have a following in the land of Israel. We have records of people listening to her. She is buried in Har HaZeitim. She was a real person, and she did have a following, but she was before her time. She was constrained in many ways. So this is not really what we're looking for in terms of the role of women in Hasidut. And some scholars said, Adarabba. There was a great scholar of Hasidism in Israel as well as in London passed away not long ago. We mourn her loss. Ada Rappaport Albert, who said, quite the contrary. The role of women in Hasidut was very constrained, and they adopted negative attitudes. You have certain passages in the Kabbalah that say perhaps unflattering things about feminine forces, what's called the Shekhinah. But she was not optimistic, generally speaking, about lifting up the historical role of women in Hasidut, perhaps with the exception of Chabad, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. However, there is in fact a significant theoretical literature which discusses the role of women in Hasidut, going back to passages in Kabbalah, and I would say even back to the Talmud and the Midrash. And this is what is called in Kabbalistic texts, Sod Miut Hayareach, the secret or the mystery of the diminishment of the moon. There is a passage in the Talmud, Bavli Chulin 60b. It appears again, or not again, but there are parallel texts in Breshit Rabbah and other places that say, originally the sun and moon were made of equal size. The moon complained, God diminished the moon wasn't happy, and God eventually said, moon, you are right. Heviu alai kapara al shemi'atati et hayarech. God said, I need an atonement because I diminished the moon. And in Kabbalah, the idea is that there will be a restoration of the moon. We actually say this in the Kiddush Levana, the sanctification of the new moon, which happens once a month. Actually, our family just did Kiddush Levana, Motzei Shabbat. You do it when the moon is waxing. When it reaches its fullness, that is to say on the 15th, it's already too late. So you may have a day or so, perhaps, to do the Kiddush Levana, depending on when you see this video. In any event, it says, we pray, Yiratzon lamalot pigimat halavana velo yeheva shum miut v'yeor halavana ki or chama ki or shivat yemei v'reshit kamo shehaita kodem miuta. That eventually, in the eschaton, in the Messianic era, in the time of restoration, the symbol of restoration and really the channeling of restoration will be that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. There will be a full restoration of the moon. But the moon is symbolically feminine. So in Kabbalah, Sod Miut Hayarech, and the restoration of the moon actually relates to the restoration of the divine feminine. The contemporary scholar, the great scholar of Kabbalah and Hasidut, Professor Moshe Idel, has a book that he calls The Privileged Divine Feminine in Kabbalah. The Privileged Divine Feminine in Kabbalah. And Idel argues that rather than saying that feminism influenced Jewish thought, as many people say, that there's so much interest now in women's role, well, that's a result of contemporary feminism. He turns the tables and he says the direction of influence may be reversed. Kabbalistic ideas on the restoration and ascension of the Shekhinah may have influenced early Renaissance and Enlightenment thinking and eventually percolated into feminism. Be that as it may, let me show you at least one text of a Hasidic master on this very theme. Rav Clonimus Kalman Epstein of Krakow. As you see on your screen, 1754 to 1823. He was a disciple of Rav Elimelech and Lizensk and the seer, the Chose of Lublin. His Sefer Ma'or Vashemesh is indeed a fundamental work. It's a beautiful Hasidic work. You know, I've been mentioning very, very briefly. I mentioned a work of Rav Shneur Zalman of Ladi. I mentioned Kedusha Levi of Levi Yitzchak, and I mentioned Orhav Meir of Zev Vos of Zhitomir. I have to mention also Ma'or V'Shemesh. These are enormously rich and wonderful works that there's no way to do justice to it in the time that we have. But here is one text in Parshas Beshalach where he talks about Miriam's dance. You remember that Shirat Hayam, the song at the sea. The sea has split, the Egyptians have drowned, they pursued Bnei Israel. Actually, it's the Parsha of the week where this is being recorded. I understand that it's going to be seen later on, but it won't be that far away from now. It's Parshat Beshalach, Exodus 15, Exodus 16. Moshe and the Bnei Israel sing Shirat Hayam, Az Yashir Moshe u'Bnei Israel. Then Miriam comes out. V'teitzena kol hanashim acharena bitufim uvimecholot. The women go with Miriam, and they have timbrels, they have instruments. Mecholot, he understands to be circle dances. So here's how he reads it. Ma'or V'Shemesh says, all the worlds and all creatures may be categorized as the forces. He's talking about Kabbalistic forces. Basically, the masculine and feminine, the principles of bestowal and receptivity. A higher world bestows the flow of radiance to the world below it. In similar fashion, somebody who needs to learn goes to somebody who has more knowledge. This is because anything bounded has both upper and lower extremities. In the Yemot HaMashiach, in Olam Haba, however, the line and the circle will be equal. That is to say, the line is linearity and hierarchy. Circle is everything is equidistant from the center. And therefore, the circle represents and symbolizes a more egalitarian view of the world. There will no longer be the categories of masculine and feminine. This is really quite an astonishing statement. All will come to realize God's divine light equally. This is just like a round object that has no beginning and no end, right? The circle has no beginning and no end, and every point is equidistant from the center. Then no one will need to learn from his neighbor. This is the meaning of a circle dance. In other words, why do we dance in circle dances? Like we do the Hakafot of Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, and other occasions as well. We are exemplifying and modeling this idea where every part of the circle circumference is equidistant from the center. So all will absorb the clear light of God's divinity equally, as it is written, as a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, no longer will they need to teach one another and say one another, Du'u et Hashem. In other words, we won't have teachers, we won't have students. We will all be teachers, we will all be students. We will all be givers, we will all be receivers equally. For all of them, for the least of them to the greatest shall know me, declares Hashem. So, and this was the intention of Miriam HaNeviah. She had all the women follow her and performed circle dances, hakafot, with them, with the intent implicit in the verse, Nekeva tesovev gever, a woman shall encircle a man, in order to draw upon the supernal light from the place where the categories of masculine and feminine do not exist. I have to say that this sounds like it could be written in 2024. It was written in the early 1800s. It was written well over 200 years ago in Krakow. Moshe sang, Ashir al Hashem, I will sing. Moses was still operating under the dichotomous categories, the polar opposites of masculine and feminine, because he didn't get the full supernal light. But Miriam, through her circle dance, did draw down the supernal light. Then they all came to the realization, than which no greater realization is possible. In other words, they came to the highest level of realization. Therefore, Miriam didn't say Ashir al Hashem in the future. She said Shir al Hashem. You can sing it now. You can happen. She brought that highest level of realization, at least to the women at that time. So, as I say, Miriam and now this is a bit of my explanation, but I think it's very clear. Miriam and the other women attained the highest state of spiritual realization, a place of radical egalitarianism where all rankings and all hierarchies, all rank orderings disappear. disappeared. Miriam not only reaches a higher state than the men in general, she attains a higher level than Moshe himself, a level that Moses could only foresee for the eschatological future. It's really an extraordinary passage because we all know at the end of Sefer Devarim, it says there never was like a prophet like unto Moses. Lo kam Yisrael navi kemoshe. And here, Rav Cornelius Kalman Epstein of Krakow, you cannot accuse him of 21st century feminism. He is channeling another world. He's channeling a Kabbalistic view of radical egalitarianism, but it certainly has echoes in our own day and time. So this is, as far as I'm going to take what I would say the theoretical aspect of Hasidic teaching, of Hasidic theology. Now I'm going to go to a sociological, historical analysis of women's role in Hasidism. Yes, and I'm going to put this book on the screen. This is the book that I had the privilege to really find and to bring to the public's attention. It had somewhat been languishing. This is Malka Shapira's book. I was privileged to do the introduction, the annotations, the footnotes, and the translation. And this is a picture of Malka in her years in Kozhenitz, as we will shortly hear. For more details on this, I'm now going to turn to, I'm really honored that my family is with me here. It was important to all of us that this is a woman's voice in Hasidism. I want you to hear a woman's voice from women's voices. This is my daughter, Sarah Henna Dahan, who will read the introductory passage. Sarah Henna, thank you very much.
Thank you. So here we introduce the writings of Malka Shapiro, 1894 to 1971. Born Razel Malka Batzion Hapstein, Shapiro grew up in Kozhenitz, a small provincial town about 50 miles southeast of Warsaw, where her father, Rabbi Yerachmiel Moshe Hapstein, 1860 to 1909, was the incumbent Kozhenitzer Rebbe, in a line begun by the famed Kozhenitzer Maggid, who died in 1814, one of the founding fathers of Polish Hasidism. In 1927, she left Poland and emigrated to Eretz Israel. In the 1950s and 1960s, several collections of her Hebrew writings were published in Israel. Much of Shapiro's work consists of autobiographical memoir describing her life in rural Poland at the beginning of the 20th century. The narrative often unfolds from the perspective of a young girl at the threshold of maturity, about 11 or 12 years old, named Bat Zion, the author's literary persona. The members of Shapiro's family, women especially, are the major characters in her stories, and a major theme is the role of women in Hasidism. Women are depicted not only as performing acts of service, kindness, and charity, but also as scholars of Torah, transmitters of sacred traditions, and as spiritual beings who attain holiness and strive for elevated and sublime states of personal inner piety. With her richness of expression, Malka Shapiro recreates the taste and texture of Eastern Europe Hasidic piety from within, presenting Hasidism as a devotional path. Her stress is always on the interior life and the cultivation of sublime states of awareness and reflection. She depicts all the members of her family, women and men, as attending to inwardness with loving, reverential care. Shapiro's portrayal of the meticulous care with which her family members shower upon matters of the spirit finds a parallel in her own loving attention to matters of style and language. Her stories are written in a poetic literary Hebrew, which reveals broad knowledge of biblical, rabbinic, and Kabbalistic sources. Kozhenitz and Sacred Place. While depicting her family and the Hasidism of her youth, Shapiro describes the place where she grew up, the town of Kozhenitz, whose Jewish community no longer existed when her books were published. She traces with love the world of her childhood, a world of profound tenderness, exquisite beauty, and enveloping holiness, filled with individuals whose aspirations were directed entirely to the domain of the sacred. In this world, the domestic and natural environment is not merely an arena for the unfolding of events, but rather a vital and active contributor to the story. Her home and surroundings are suffused with the rhythms of nature and the cycle of the Jewish sacred calendar. Kazanets not only reverberates with holiness, it yearns for it, coming alive in its own voice. The natural world in which the town is situated is alive with metaphysical and Kabbalistic forces, so that humans and nature join together to celebrate the sacred days. Kazanets, in other words, is a sacred place with a personality and a soul. In Midin Larachamim, Makom is defined by locations associated with Malka's famous ancestor, Rabbi Israel Hapstein, who died in 1814, known as the Maggid, or preacher, of Kazanets, one of the founders of Hasidism in Poland. A master of Talmud and legal codes, as well as the practical and theoretical Kabbalah, he was sought out for blessings and amulets, which were reputed to assist barren couples in having children. The Maggid's shtibel, his personal room, which had been left just as it was during his lifetime 100 years earlier, was revered as a shrine. As Shapiro describes it, the canopied bed upon which the Maggid slept, the upholstered chair upon which he sat, the high and narrow table upon which he wrote the amulets and Torah esoterica, these were all still in their places. Silently, they absorbed the laments of people who came to pour their hearts out in this sacred place. The Hapstein family and the Hasidim apparently believed that the spirit of the Maggid was still present in the room. On the eve of Shabbat, Shapiro's father would enter the room with great respect and say, "Good Shabbos," and leave. At the end of the Sabbath, he would come with his violin and play the special Kazanetzer melody for Eliyahu Hanavi. During times of illness, the room would be used for prayers and the chanting of psalms. Another place associated with the memory of the Maggid was his Beis Medrash, or study hall, which was used for study, prayer, and other sacred activities. This is Shapiro's description of an evening Hanukkah celebration led by her father, Rabbi Yerachmiel Moshe Hapstein, the incumbent Rabbi of Kazanets, in the days of her childhood. Midnight. The songs began to ring out from the old Beis Medrash of the Maggid that was filled with veteran Hasidim. The Rebbe kindled the lamp in the Hanukkah candelabrum with the old silver tongs. He kept adjusting the wick. He began singing psalms and songs of praise, to which the Hasidim joined in responsively. The wick from the Holy Land, which had been fashioned to the accompaniment of esoteric contemplations, rose in flame from the pure oil. The Beis Medrash was afire in songs of praise, in melodies, and in the glow of the candles affixed in silver candlesticks on the long tables. Under the beams of the low ceiling poured out the notes of the great Hallel and Psalms. They stretched out and enveloped the courtyard, its buildings, its rooms, and its trees seized by slumber. The ambience of the Beit Midrash, bathed in ancient light and saturated with melodies from the font of the primordial one, warms the spirits of the Hasidim, who stand crowded in, breaking out responsively to the verses. The Rebbe begins playing a melody on the violin. The notes tremble and shake. They flow out like the current of a river that has burst its dam, enveloping the room, uniting with holy longing in the song that bursts out of the heart of the Hasidim, a psalm, a song of dedication. The room reverberates as if singing of its own accord. The notes of the melody combine with the pounding of feet as the Hasidim join hands and begin to dance, swept away by the spirit. The dancers circle round, chained hand in hand. The eyes are closed. Only the heart is open. The Rebbe puts down the wondrous violin. With the silver tongs, he adjusts the Hanukkah lamp. He begins dancing. He leaps with the others. His mouth utters songs of praise incessantly. The shadows of the dancing Hasidim prance on the whitewashed walls, which, worn out from age, tell stories of bygone times. In Shapiro's depiction, Hanukkah is being celebrated not only by the Rebbe, her father, by the Hasidim, his disciples, but also by the Beis Medrash itself, which bears and reverberates with the spirit of all the sacred melodies that ever were sung there, as far back as the days of the holy Maggid.
Thank you so much, Sarah Henna. You can see Malka Shapiro's depiction of the atmosphere and the resonance. There's so much emphasis there on niggun, on music, on singing the Hallel, and you caught the fact that the Rebbe himself was playing the violin. This was a feature of Beis Kozhenitz from the beginning, I would say, ad hayom hazeh. Maybe we'll talk more about that in our next session. Now, thank you again, Sarahana. Thank you more than so much. What a beautiful reading. I'm going to turn now to my daughter Esther Rachel Amuna, Esther Mallard, and Esther's going to share a section about Perot Tu Bishvat. As we're recording now, this is a time of Tu Bishvat. I recognize that when you're seeing this, it might be later, but it's relevant always because her real focus is the connection between Perot Eretz Yisrael and the Kozhenitz in Poland. There was a special shipment that was very, very difficult to get at that time of Perot Eretz Yisrael, the fruits of Eretz Yisrael that were shipped to Poland. Again, a very difficult enterprise at that time, which were carefully unwrapped and celebrated and shared by the Rebbe as part of the Tu B'Shvat rite. I now turn, it's my great honor and pleasure to turn to my daughter Esther for this reading, Perot Tu B'Shvat.
The sky was clearing. A lazy sun shone in a haze of pallid gold. When the sleigh returned home, children could still be heard shouting as they threw snowballs in the fields behind the courtyards. Hasidim streamed from the open courtyard to the closed inner courtyard by way of the small gate. The young birch trees in the garden in the corner of the courtyard stood bare and frozen between the ice-covered rows of fallen leaves. The reflection of the bronze sundial at the courtyard center sparkled on its small white marble stand. The Rebbe's room, dimly lit, filled from end to end, was bathed in silence. The beams of the low ceiling seemed to be listening mutely, and the double window panes watched with frozen, amazed eyes. The Hasidim stood and listened. Batzion glided on tiptoes behind the crowd, coming to the lit stove near the door of her mother, the Rebbitzins' room. She saw her father, the Rebbe, sitting on his upholstered chair at the head of the table. His face, captured in thought, beamed steadily, his pure high forehead standing out under his sable shtreimel. Speaking the praises of Eretz Yisrael, he drew endless inspiration as he gazed at the rectangular parcel filled with fruit, sparkling in its white wrapping on the polished black table. His enchanting clear voice, ringing with spiritual rapture, broke the warm silence. Every grain of Eretz Yisrael is holy in many ways, and surely the fruit it produces is holy. The taste and fragrance of the fruit are hidden within, until the time comes for them to be revealed. Every spiritually aware person can sense this even now. The Hasidim stood huddled together, trembling, listening with deepest concentration. Small fruits began pouring out of the parcel onto the table. The sound of the hard shells tumbling on the tabletop resonated in the silent room. Batzion stood back, in the back of the crowd, beyond the lit stove. the Rebbe's holy wooden chest staring at her. Its green sides, shielded by those brass bands, appeared to her as a wondrous plant kept in some interior chamber. An air of serenity swept through the warm, dark room. The mood reminded her of twilight at the entry of Shabbat, when one could hear verses from the Song of Songs floating about. Your limbs are an orchard of pomegranates, nard and saffron, fragrant reed and cinnamon, with all aromatic woods. Bat Zion was called to the table by her father, whose face, though smiling, bespoke pain. He said to her, "We once had saintly women, matriarchs, prophetesses, wise women. If you so desire, you can be like them." He gave her almonds and some seeds. Bat Zion kissed her father's hand, her fist squeezing the hard seeds. When she came to the threshold of the next room to kiss her mother's hand, she detected concern on the Rebbitzin's gracious, radiant face. Her mother, the Rebbitzin, leaned down to her and said quietly, "Put some of them away, my daughter, for safekeeping."
It was so beautiful. Esti, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing that to realization. Thank you, Sarhana. Thank you, Esti. And now I'm going to turn to my dear wife, Lori Wolf, Polen. And we're going to focus on one other strong personality in the memoir, and that is the grandmother, Sarah Devora Shapiro Perlow, whose life spanned the first half of the 19th century well into the 20th century. And you see on, perhaps you see on your screen, there's this extraordinary portrait of Sarah Devora. I'm going to say something. Yes, thank you very, very much. Yeah, this is really, really extraordinary. This is a contemporary portrait of a wedding that took place in 1883. Shortly before Rosh Hashanah of that year, Sarah Devora, that's the grandmother in the memoir. The grandmother in the memoir, that's the lady in the, really in the center, in the green. So her son Yisrael, who's standing at her side in the cap, is marrying Bracha Shendel, the granddaughter of Rabbi Yochanan Twersky from the Chernobyl lineage, in this case, in Rachmastrivka. This is one of the offshoots of the great Chernobyl dynasty, Rachmastrivka in Ukraine. The grand occasion was commemorated in this painting, a portrait of the groom's evening, a tradition going back to the founders of the Twersky and Chernobyl lineage. The evening before the wedding, the bride's and groom's families gather together for a festive celebration whose high point is the dance of the bride and groom, accompanied by music and joyous applause. Judging by the level of detail and sophistication of the portrait, it must be the work of a professional artist who was expressly commissioned to capture the occasion. A very prominent figure on the campus is the bride, Bracha Shendel, radiant in a soft pink floor-length gown with matching bonnet, her face unveiled. Her mother stands at her side, and her grandmother is seated nearby. Behind her is a group of young women identified as sisters of the groom. To the bride's left is a klezmer band, including two fiddlers, a cymbalist, and a double bass. About 8 feet away, we see the groom, Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael, wearing a Hasidic youngster's cap. He is very young. He's the only male in the portrait that doesn't have a beard. Check that out. He's the only one who doesn't have a beard. He was born in 1868. He would have been 15 years old at the time of his wedding. Standing at his side is his mother, Sarah Devora Shapiro Perla, who we've been talking about. She was born, his mother, which is Malka Shapiro's grandmother. Again, I'm only lifting up the sefer so you'll understand. This is Malka's grandmother, but the mother of the young man, the chassan, she is resplendent in a green gown with chiffon overlay and gold trim. With her right hand, I want you to look at the hands. Her right hand is grasping her son's right hand, if I have that correct. I think I do, yes. It is to say, you would think naturally she would be grasping his left hand, but no, she's reaching over his chest. Do you see it? She's reaching really over him to grasp his right hand and gestures with her left hand towards the bride, who looks expectantly in his direction, leaning towards the open space on the parquet floor. The bride lifts the taffeta outer layer of her gown demurely off the floor with both hands. She's getting ready to dance, her face reflecting self-possession and maturity. She's very mature. She is obviously beckoning her groom to dance with her, but he doesn't seem to be responding to that, nor to his mother's efforts to move him toward his bride. Young Yisrael's eyes are trained forward, avoiding the gaze, at least at this moment, of his betrothed. The artist has captured the poignancy of this moment, where a young Hasidic lad is now expected to pivot completely, preparing to relate in loving intimacy with his life partner. Notice that there are as many women depicted in the scene as men. There's no physical separation, this is to say there's no mechitza. And the matriarch of the family, Sarah Devora, is in control. So you see her in the role as the family matriarch, really assuming responsibility for everything that's going on. And I'm sure that she commissioned this portrait. The bride is at the center, but maybe even more so, the mother, the grandmother, is orchestrating everything. And now we're going to hear a story told by the grandmother, Sarah Devora, that exemplifies how she's at the very center of the Hasidic lineage, and how, as I put it, it is the grandmother who preserves the memories of the dynasty, and who also projects the image of the dynasty, what I would call the dynastic vision, into the future. Lori, I'm really honored to have my wife read this little segment of Sarah Devora Shapiro. Lori.
The Rebbe's mother, Rebbitzin Sarah Devora, hurried impatiently to her son the Rebbe's armchair as those standing made way for her. "My son," she said bitterly, "man was created with a body, and it is impossible to live on sacred intentions alone. After all is said and done, you must preserve your health in order for you to survive until such time as it's within your power, son, to bring us to that time, to the final redemption. Even your holy ancestors testified to this." The Rebbitzin stopped talking and sat down on the chair that her son, the Rebbe, had brought for her. Her thick eyebrows met in her wrinkled forehead. On her chiseled face were inscribed bitterness and pain. Once again, she rose and pressed her short fingers on the table, whose polished surface reflected the candle flames. The shadows of the 12 standing and seated individuals made the dimly lit room appear to be filled with people. Her robust voice, filled with anguish, broke the heavy silence. "Listen, my son. Let me tell you what I saw with my own eyes and heard with my ears." The Rebbitzin began telling her story. In those days, the Hasidim were accustomed to go by foot to visit the great tzaddikim of the generation. A group of Hasidim left Kozhenitz in order to reach Mogelnitsa in time for the Sabbath of Slichos. Their journey was blessed with providential guidance, for the group lost its way in the forest. And in those days, the forests were home for beasts of prey, as well as robbers who hid and lay in wait for passers-by. The forests were thick. This was before the time that lumber merchants had begun intensive harvesting of trees in order to send timber downriver by raft. When the members of this group reached the court of my holy grandfather, they were huddled up against the cold. Their clothes were rain-soaked, and they were tired and weary, but their spirits were upbeat. In a buoyant mood, they told about their adventures, and in particular about the time when one of the group disappeared, a chassid known simply as Rabbi. Now he was back with his friends, but did not utter a word. Between the afternoon and the evening services, when the Mogelnitsa court was filled with the hazy, weepy atmosphere of the days of repentance and mercy, the foot-traveling Hasidim sat on a long bench in the back of a large wooden shed that had been set up for the high holiday crowd and told their stories to the Hasidim in their talitot, preparing for the Slichot service. The wind whistled, lightning clapped, and raindrops fell from the cloud, making their way in haste, as was appropriate for the nights of divine service. The stars had already disappeared quietly between the patches of red clouds, like the eyes of an accused being brought to the dock. One chassid began telling his story, his voice instilling a spirit of faith in the hearts of his listeners. We left the town of Kozhenitz, nestled in the midst of the forests by the highway. Kozhenitz was where our holy Rabbi was born, and in Kozhenitz stood the cradle of his mother, the Tzaddiket, the Maggid's daughter. We rejoiced in the feeling that we were emissaries on a sacred mission. We were brave pilgrims walking in reverence to greet our sovereign. We knew the forest trails well. Their rustling trees sent us their aromatic resins, and their birds sang hymns that united with our prayers. Even the armed forest guards greeted us warmly, and no brazen dogs barked. The woods came and went, separated by huts and fruit trees, with empty meadows casting a benign eye upon us. Peasants drawing water from wells gave us their blessing, which we took to be a favorable portent. The words of the blessing were no doubt put in their mouths from heaven. Surely a year of blessing is in store for us.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Thank you for the three selections. Again, Sarahena, Esti, my dear wife Lori, I cannot thank you enough. The sense that I get, and I hope that you get, is this is a very different image of Hasidism. It is a bucolic, that is to say, it's a pastoral Hasidism, open to nature, open to the world, open to animals and trees and flowers and voices, to the past, to the future. A very, very different perspective than the one that you sometimes see in Hasidic texts. And it really supports the thesis of a great scholar of Hasidism who passed away, and Zichrona Livracha, I really mourn her loss, Tzippi Kaufman, who talks about the focus on narrativity, on being present, on B'chol D'rachecha Da'eu, knowing God in all your ways. This brief encounter with the women of the Kozhenitz lineage underscores Tzippi's thesis and suggests that our contemporary search for models of deeper appreciation of all the voices in our community can be enriched by the overlooked and underappreciated sources in Hasidism, especially women's voices. Thank you all.